The ground trembles long before the killing starts. Heavy hoplite shields, aspides rimmed in bronze, knock and rattle as lines dress, the ring of metal on metal rising, like distant thunder across the Leuctran plain. The air smells of trampled grass, sweat, and the cold tang of oiled spearheads. Above it all, in the still summer sky of 371 BC, vultures circle, already measuring the scale of what is about to happen. On one side stand the Spartans and their Peloponnesian allies, some 10 to 12,000 men, veterans of generations of war, drilled since childhood to believe that no equal enemy can stand before a Spartan phalanx. Their king, Cleombrotus I, commands the right wing where the elite Spartiates mass in their traditional position of honor, confident that this will be just another lesson in Spartan discipline and battlefield strategy. On the other side, fewer in number and surrounded by doubting allies, the Thebans form up under Epaminondas, a man whose name many in the Spartan line barely know, but whose tactical imagination will soon define one of the most legendary battles in Greek history. Between them, cavalry already skirmish, horses screaming as they collide, Theban riders pressing hard and driving Spartan horsemen back in a swirl of dust and hooves. In the confusion, retreating Spartan cavalry crash through their own infantry line, opening gaps at the worst possible place, right where Cleombrotus intends to wheel and outflank the enemy. As the dust settles, Epaminondas sees it, a fracture in the Spartan machine, a brief moment where centuries of habit and confidence leave their line exposed. He has built his entire war tactic for this instant. Instead of matching the Spartan front line man for man, he has stacked his left wing to an unprecedented depth, perhaps 50 ranks, aimed straight at the Spartan right, the hardest, most elite part of their army. At the spear point of this dense column stands the sacred band of Thebes under Pelopidas, 300 men who have sworn to live and die together, their shields overlapping so tightly that their formation looks less like a line and more like a bronze-scaled beast coiled to strike. The order goes down the ranks, shields rise, spears level. The Theban left begins to move, not in a straight, matched line, but in an oblique advance that angles directly toward the Spartan king himself. And what happens in the next few terrible minutes will end the myth of Spartan invincibility and turn the Battle of Leuctra into one of the defining moments of epic battle history. But to understand how one formation could kill an empire's aura, the story has to begin long before the first spear thrust on that plain. The road to Leuctra begins with resentment, humiliation, and a Sparta that has climbed to the summit of Greek power and then overreached. After its victory in the Peloponnesian War in 404 BC, Sparta broke Athenian sea power, dismantled rival democracies, and installed oligarchic governments across Greece, becoming the dominant force in the Greek world. But dominance bred interference, and nowhere did Spartan heavy-handedness burn more deeply than in Boeotia, the region dominated by the city of Thebes. Sparta repeatedly intervened in Boeotian politics, broke up the Boeotian League that Thebes once led, and even occupied Thebes itself, placing a garrison on the city's citadel, the Cadmea. For years, Theban patriots simmered in exile or in silence, until a daring coup in 379 BC saw them infiltrate the city in disguise, assassinate the Spartan-backed rulers, and trigger a revolt that expelled the Spartan garrison. In the years that followed, Thebes rebuilt the Boeotian League, asserted independence, and challenged Spartan supremacy with increasing boldness. Sparta could not tolerate this. Thebes sat in central Greece, astride key routes and alliances, and its growing power threatened Spartan influence not just locally, but across the peninsula. Tensions rose through the 370s, with sporadic campaigns and skirmishes, until a peace conference in 371 BC in Sparta brought the conflict into sharp focus. There, Epaminondas, relatively unknown but already a leading statesman and general, insisted that Thebes sign for all Boeotia as leader of the Boeotian League, directly challenging Sparta's right to dictate the political order of Greece. The Spartan king Agesilaus refused. In Spartan eyes, Thebes was just one city, not the voice of a region, and Epaminondas's demand was an arrogant provocation. When Theban envoys left without agreeing to Sparta's terms, the message was clear. The dispute would be settled not with words, but with spear and shield on the battlefield. In the months that followed, Sparta assembled an expedition under its other king, Cleombrotus I, calling on allies from the Peloponnese and central Greece. His force, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 strong by most estimates, included about 700 full Spartan citizens, Spartiates, whose presence alone could intimidate many Greek foes. Marching north through the passes into Boeotia, Cleombrotus aimed to break the Theban challenge with one decisive engagement. Thebes, by contrast, pulled together its Boeotian League contingents, mustering a smaller army of perhaps 6,000 to 7,000 hoplites, along with cavalry and light troops. Many allies were lukewarm, nervous about facing Sparta in open battle, and some would later desert. Theban leaders debated whether to risk a pitched battle at all. But Epaminondas argued that retreat or delay would only embolden Sparta and erode Theban authority. If Thebes wanted to lead Boeotia and reshape Greek politics, it had to prove its worth on the field. The choice was made. The Boeotian army marched out to meet the Spartans near the little village of Leuctra, on a plain bounded by low hills, with enough open ground for phalanxes to maneuver, but not so wide that numbers alone could decide the day. The armies faced each other, dust hanging in the still air, each side knowing that what happened here could redefine power in Greece for a generation. But Epaminondas was not planning to fight just another standard hoplite battle, and that is what terrified those who could see what he was about to attempt. On the Spartan side stands King Cleombrotus I, representing a state that has built its identity on training, discipline, and the phalanx. Spartan boys were taken from their families into the agoge at age 7, hardened with harsh discipline and constant drills, molded into hoplites whose cohesion on the battlefield was famous across the Greek world. Their battle doctrine was simple and brutally effective. Advance in a broad, well-dressed line, shields overlapping, spears leveled. Use local superiority on the right wing to roll up the enemy line from that side, counting on superior training and morale to break weaker hoplites facing them. On the Theban side stands Epaminondas, a statesman general whose combination of philosophical depth and battlefield creativity made him one of the most innovative commanders in ancient warfare. Influenced by Pythagorean ideas and trained in both politics and arms, he brought a reflective but ruthlessly practical mind to the problem of beating Sparta with fewer men. The sacred band had already proven its worth in earlier clashes, where it had stood firm against more numerous enemies and helped win key victories. Numerically, the Thebans are outmatched. Estimates vary, but most modern historians agree that the Theban Boeotian army numbered perhaps 6,000 to 7,000 hoplites, facing a Spartan-led force maybe 10,000 to 12,000 strong. Many Boeotian allies are unreliable. Some will hang back or break under pressure. So Epaminondas chooses not to fight conventionally. He studies the terrain. The Leuctran plain is not infinitely wide. The ground gently narrows, and there are gentle rises and features that allow him to limit how many enemy hoplites can engage at once. Instead of extending his line to match the Spartan frontage, he deliberately shortens it, concentrating his heaviest troops on his left flank opposite the Spartan right. The rest of his line, center and right, is intentionally weakened and set back, a refused flank screened by cavalry and skirmishers. These troops will not immediately close with the Spartan left. Instead, they will hold back, buying time and avoiding a decisive clash until the reinforced Theban left can win on the critical sector. In modern terms, Epaminondas is focusing combat power at a single decisive point, turning a numerical disadvantage into local superiority. Cleombrotus, for his part, expects a more traditional battle. He arranges his troops in the usual fashion, Spartans on the right, allies in the center and left. He plans to shift his line slightly to the right, a common tactic in hoplite warfare, as each man tends to drift right to seek protection behind his neighbor's shield, using this to gain a positional advantage and possibly outflank the Theban left. Instead, his cavalry will sow chaos among his own ranks and open the door for Epaminondas' Spartan killer formation to strike. The stage is set. Spartan-led horsemen trot out in front of their phalanx, hooves drumming the ground, dust rising in pale columns as they move to meet the Theban cavalry. But unlike in many earlier wars, the Thebans have invested in stronger mounted forces. Their cavalry is better organized and more effective than the scattered, less cohesive Spartan horse. That retreat changes everything. Beaten back in front of their own line, the Spartan horse do not peel gracefully to the flanks. Instead, they are driven rearward in disorder, charging straight into the advancing Spartan infantry and tearing gaps into the carefully dressed ranks. Epaminondas sees the chaos. On his left, his own cavalry and skirmishers have done their work, creating both time and opportunity. The left wing moves. At its point, the sacred band of Thebes, under Pelopidas, steps off in perfect lockstep, bronze greaves flashing, long spears angled down toward the Spartan king's position. Behind them, rank after rank, dozens deep, adds weight and momentum, turning the column into a human battering ram. Across the field, the Spartans on the right struggle to lock shields, to reform their 12-deep line as their own cavalry spills through the gaps. Cleombrotus knows the stakes. If his right wing holds, the battle can still unfold as planned. But now the geometry of the battlefield has changed. Instead of meeting a straight enemy line, the Spartan right faces a narrow but massively deep column that concentrates perhaps the majority of Theban elite hoplites directly against them. The rest of the Theban line, center and right, is held back, oblique, refusing a full-scale engagement with the Spartan left and allied troops. The collision, when it comes, is brutal. The front ranks of the sacred band slam into the Spartan right with a shock that ripples back through both formations. The sound is a sickening grind of bronze on bronze, wood cracking, men grunting under the impact as shield edges bite into shoulders and spear points scrape across armor. In a conventional 12-deep formation, force spreads along the line. Here, the Theban 50-deep mass channels it into a narrow front, creating overwhelming pressure at a few points where the sacred band stands face to face with Sparta's best. Behind the first rank, each man pushes, shoulder to back, chest to shoulder, adding his weight to the shove, while those in the third and fourth ranks brace, ready to step into any gap as casualties fall. Spartan hoplites are no strangers to this kind of close-quarters horror. They have trained for it just as intensely as any Theban. But here, they face something new. Not an equal match in depth and frontage, but a concentrated hammer blow falling exactly on their strongest point. Their 12 ranks, solid though they are, cannot easily absorb the shock of 50 ranks driving at full force. Dust and screams swallow the fine points of strategy. Men are pinned beneath their own comrades, trampled as the living mass surges back and forth. The air fills with the metallic tang of blood and the raw sound of exertion. Men gasping, shields rattling, boots grinding into the dirt. On the rest of the field, time stretches. The Spartan center and left, seeing their right engaged, advance cautiously, but they do not hit the Theban line with anything like the same violence. The Theban center is held back, avoiding decisive contact. Its job is not to win, but to not lose while the left wing does the real killing. As the contest on the right wing drags on, the Spartans find themselves in a position they are not used to, slowly, inexorably being pushed back. The local superiority of the Theban force, its sheer depth, begins to tell. Cleombrotus's elite guard fight with the ferocity expected of Spartan citizens. For a while they hold the line, even as comrades fall beside them, spears shattered, switching to short swords in the crush. But in this kind of fighting, individual heroism can do only so much. What matters is cohesion, depth, and the ability to rotate fresh men into the front. At a critical moment, Pelopidas sees an opening. Somewhere near the Spartan king, a gap appears, perhaps as a few men fall, perhaps as the line wavers for a heartbeat. The fighting around Cleombrotus intensifies into a swirling knot of violence. Spartans close ranks around him, their shields overlapping in a tight ring, while men from the sacred band press in, their spears darting like venomous snakes over and under shield rims. For the men around him, the shock is immediate and devastating. The king's guard fights savagely to prevent his body from being seized, but the psychological effect runs deeper than one man's death. The invincible Spartans, the men who crushed Athens, who dictated terms to other Greeks, have seen their king cut down not by barbarian Persians, but by fellow Greeks on a plain in Boeotia. Casualties mount at an appalling rate. Around 400 Spartiates, perhaps more than a third of the entire adult male citizen body of Sparta, are killed in the fighting, along with many allied hoplites. In a city-state whose political and military power depends on a small core of full citizens, this is not just a tactical defeat, it is demographic trauma. On the rest of the field, the effects ripple outward. The Spartan center and left, seeing their right wing driven back and their king dead, are suddenly exposed. Their line is now vulnerable to flank attacks from victorious Thebans who can wheel inward, collapsing the Spartan formation from the inside. Epaminondas has achieved the core of his battlefield strategy. By focusing overwhelming force on the Spartan right, by using an oblique order and refused flank, he has shattered the strongest part of the enemy army while exposing the rest to collapse. But now, he must decide how far to push that triumph. At Leuctra, Epaminondas shows not just creativity, but control. Rather than order a wild pursuit that could scatter his own line or drive his men into traps, he allows the main Spartan force to withdraw once it is clearly broken, granting a truce for the collection of the dead and wounded according to Greek custom. And as the dust settles, ancient Greece itself begins to shift. Even in defeat, Spartans are expected to stand firm. Those Spartiates who survive the initial collapse of the right wing do not simply sprint for safety. They attempt to form new defensive clumps, shielding their king's body, covering the retreat of allies, and maintaining what discipline they can in the face of disaster. For some, this will be their last stand. Surrounded by Thebans pressing the advantage, they die in tight circles of bronze and blood. their shields stacked atop one another in death as they were in life. But Epaminondas does not turn Leuctra into a massacre. Once the Spartan army is clearly broken and falling back, he reins in his pursuit. The Theban left, having achieved its objective by smashing the Spartan right, halts rather than racing too far ahead and risking counterattack or overextension. The center and right, which had held back throughout the battle, now move forward cautiously to occupy the field, but they do not unleash a reckless chase that might flip victory into chaos. The final scene on the battlefield is grim but ritualized. Spartans and their allies send envoys to request a truce to collect their dead, a standard practice in Greek warfare that also serves as tacit acknowledgement of defeat. Epaminondas grants it. For all the ferocity of the fighting, this is still a war between Greek city-states that share customs, religion, and a code of honor. The dead will be retrieved, armor recovered, and burial rites performed. The numbers tell their own story. The Spartans and their allies suffer perhaps around 1,000 casualties, including roughly 400 Spartiates, a catastrophic loss for a citizen body that was already shrinking even before Leuctra. The Theban and Boeotian losses are significantly lower, despite their risky decision to face Sparta in pitched battle while outnumbered. For the first time in memory, Sparta has not just failed to win, it has been decisively defeated in open-field combat by another Greek polis. In strategic terms, the immediate outcome is clear. Thebes has won a crushing victory and secured control over Boeotia. Spartan plans to suppress the Boeotian League and reassert dominance in central Greece lie ruined in the dust of Leuctra. Cleombrotus is dead. The once feared Spartan phalanx has been broken head-on, and the psychological shock reverberates through every Greek city-state watching this conflict. On that summer day in 371 BC, the balance of power in Greece begins to tilt away from Sparta. But Leuctra is not just the end of something. It is the beginning of a new, volatile era dominated, for a brief, blazing moment, by Thebes and the battlefield genius of Epaminondas. The immediate aftermath of Leuctra is felt most sharply in Sparta itself. The city that once boasted the finest heavy infantry in Greece has lost a massive portion of its citizen hoplite corps in a single day. Around 400 Spartiates, out of a citizen body that may have numbered only around 1,000 or slightly more. In a system where full citizens are already a narrow elite, atop a much larger population of helots and perioikoi, this is a blow from which Sparta will never truly recover. Politically, the defeat shatters the fear-based obedience that had held many of Sparta's allies in line. City-states in central and northern Greece, and even in the Peloponnese, begin to reconsider their allegiance. If Sparta can be beaten by Thebes in a real historical battle, then Spartan protection, or Spartan domination, no longer seems inevitable. The webs of alliances that underpinned Spartan hegemony start to unravel. For Thebes, Leuctra is the launching point of a brief period of supremacy often called the Theban hegemony. Epaminondas and his allies capitalize on the victory to reshape the political map of Greece. In subsequent campaigns, they march into the Peloponnese itself, liberating Messenia, whose people had been enslaved as helots by Sparta for roughly 2 centuries, and founding the new city of Messene. They also help refound Megalopolis in Arcadia, supporting new centers of power that further encircle and weaken Sparta. Strategically, Leuctra proves that Sparta's hoplite system is not invincible. The psychological impact is profound. Greek commanders and thinkers now understand that creative battlefield strategy and flexible use of depth and concentration can overturn even the most established military reputations. The lesson of Leuctra will echo in later innovations in Macedonian warfare under Philip II, who is traditionally said to have spent time in Thebes and to have learned from Epaminondas' example. And yet Theban dominance is short-lived. Epaminondas himself will fall in battle at Mantinea in 362 BC. And with his death, Thebes loses the visionary leadership that had elevated it so quickly. Within a few decades, Macedon under Philip and then Alexander will eclipse all the southern Greek city-states, reshaping the world on a far larger scale. Still, none of that future would have been possible without what happened on the Leuctran plain. Leuctra ended Spartan ascendancy, opened the door for Theban power, and helped create the conditions under which Macedonian military innovations would thrive. But beyond shifts in power, the battle left a deeper legacy, a blueprint for how a smaller, outnumbered force could use war tactics and battlefield strategy to overturn the odds in epic battle history. For students of ancient warfare and fans of real historical battles, Leuctra is a turning point, a case study in how tactics can break tradition. Epaminondas did not win by matching Sparta head-on in a conventional fight. He won by rewriting the rules of the Hoplite battlefield in one bold stroke. His oblique formation, massively deep left wing, refused right, cavalry and skirmishers used as active tools rather than an afterthought, showed that battlefield genius could overcome sheer reputation. The key lessons that echo through military history are clear. Concentration of force at a decisive point. By stacking his left wing to around 50 ranks, Epaminondas created overwhelming local superiority against the Spartan right, even though he was outnumbered overall. Refused flank and flexible engagement. The Theban center and right did not rush into combat. They held back, buying time and space for the decisive blow on the left to work. Integration of arms. Effective use of cavalry and light troops helped disrupt Spartan cavalry, throw their infantry into confusion, and shield Theban weaknesses elsewhere on the field. These are principles that echo far beyond Leuctra, visible in later legendary battles where smaller or supposedly weaker forces used superior strategy to overturn their enemies, from Cannae to modern engagements studied in war colleges. Leuctra also matters because it humanizes the Spartans. For centuries, popular imagination has seen them as invincible super warriors. But at Leuctra, they are revealed as men, brave, disciplined, but vulnerable to better tactics and changing times. It is a stark reminder that no military system, no matter how feared, is beyond defeat. For storytellers, history documentary creators, and lovers of epic battle history, Leuctra is cinematic gold. It has everything: a rising power challenging an old empire, a battlefield genius risking his city's future on an unorthodox formation, an elite band of 300 fighting at the very point of impact, a king dying under the crush of shields, and a single battlefield decision that shatters centuries of myth in a single afternoon. It is the day when Thebes proved that strategy could kill a legend, and that is why, centuries later, viewers still lean forward when the story of Leuctra is told, hearing echoes of shield on shield and feeling the tension of that moment when a smaller army dared to do what no one believed possible, and won. If stories like this pull you into the dust and blood of real historical battles, if you want more epic battle history, ancient warfare tactics, and legendary battles broken down like you were standing on the line yourself, then do not let this be the last campaign you march in. If you want more epic, real history battles like this, subscribe to Last Torch History, where forgotten wars ignite again.